speak on the Corbyn effect, I check out to see what the nearest seat is in Labour's target seats, and it's cities of Westminster. What a seat to win! The cities of London and Westminster, probably not even a mile away. It's a majority of 3,148. It needs a 4.07% swing for Labour to win it. If Labour wins Westminster, he's got a majority. He's got a majority without needing to govern with the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, and the Greens. He needs 64 seats in order to form a majority government. In my view, there is nothing more important for those of you who live within the radius of Westminster, cities of London and Westminster, for us to win that seat.
But if you look at the fortunes of social democracy around Europe, it is not being radical that is the problem today. What is political suicide, what is absolutely disastrous, is to look or act or sound in any way like the status quo. And what caught the imaginations of millions of people in the election campaign in 2017 was precisely that Jeremy was different, that he was outside the box, personally, politically radical, and that he brought movement methods into the way that he campaigned. And then, of course, there's the wider question as well about what happens if and when he were to get in office, because I think that the kind of subversion, the kind of sabotage that we are seeing from different sections of the state would, up to now, would be like a tea party, like a walk in the park, compared to what would happen if Jeremy Corbyn got elected with a progressive programme intact. So the conclusion for me is really that one of the most, if not the most important thing that we need to be doing for both these reasons is strengthening the movements from below, is strengthening the mass movements and resistance and organisation on the ground. And you look around politics at the moment, you can't help being struck by the extent to which campaigning and protest and organising is once again shaping the political landscape. I mean, the lecturers' strike, they've not only managed to put the question of pensions, the pensions robbery centre stage, they've also brought to light the whole question of the marketisation of universities, which would never have been discussed if it hadn't been for that struggle.
The question is, how do we turn the Labour Party from being an institution that's mainly about supporting power as domination, getting into government, acting, as it were, on behalf of the people, but never with the people, never, as Mark put it, sort of actually with the people, let alone by the people, to being a party that's actually facilitating power as transformative capacity. So we do need state resources. I mean, you know, it's handy to have the control over public money and so on. In a way, the achievement of 45 was redistribution, was public control over public money.
If we want to bring radical social change, we need to find ways that allow the oppressed and dominated groups to organize in durable ways to overcome the fragmentation and the long-seated habits of subalternity and impotence. These organizational forms need to be rooted in local communities, but also in the workplace and in all the sites where relations of power are formed and reproduced. Today, the traditional organizations of the left and of the workers' movement are weakened and seem unable to confront the relentless attacks of capitalist power. As a result, the temptation exists to get rid of the whole issue of the autonomous organization of the dominated classes and groups. That temptation should be resisted at all costs. For the exploited and the dominated to become actors of history means first and foremost to organize. Politics devoid of an emancipatory objective are only a technique of domination, and as such they are unworthy of any human endeavor. But emancipation only makes sense as the self-emancipation of all those who have an interest in breaking themselves the chains of exploitation and oppression. And to do that, they need also to make themselves the arms that are adequate to their liberation. Thank you.
There are ways to defend against the kind of inevitability that there will be pressure to compromise, that there will be huge resistance, institutional resistance, that there will be retreats and there will be defeats. Just to outline some of them, inside the party, I think it requires democratisation of the Labour Party, so that the membership, I mean, there's a traditional view that the membership should be able to hold the leadership to account, which is important, but I think it's a slightly different, that's important even with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, but there's also a slightly different dynamic in that the membership can then be an ally of the leadership against the entrenched parts of the party, and that's what we've already seen that For example, with the vote on bombing Syria in December 2015, when basically most Labour MPs, according to journalists, were going to vote to bomb Syria, until Jeremy Corbyn just sent an email to Labour Party members, said, email me your views on whether we should bomb Syria, and over 70% said don't do it. And that actually did apparently have an effect on those Labour MPs, and eventually it was quite a small rebellion.
But I think Labour is going to be very successful in the local elections. But what worries me is that success will disguise the problem which undoubtedly exists in the national opinion polls at the moment, and will inhibit us discussing what the problem is when a left insurgency becomes a left incumbency. And you can see that process now taking place, and I think we all need to debate how we're going to handle that. You see, I think it was, I said about the senior Labour person that I spoke to saying, I wouldn't send Jeremy on a demonstration outside Downing Street. But the whole notion of being a government in waiting, not a movement that's trying to bring down the Tories, gives you a sense of what the gap is between those two perspectives. I think it was an error that Jeremy Corbyn himself didn't speak on the NHS demonstration. Not that he wasn't asked, not that 100 health workers didn't write to him specifically asking him to come there, not that he personally didn't want to do it, he did. But there are decisions taken about what it looks like to be a future Prime Minister which are excluding that kind of response.
Perhaps we see that actually, instead of finding the people on our right, as we were used to find them, or at least we thought they were, we're finding people to our left. We're finding people whose attitudes and beliefs are more progressive, more radical than our own. And it's quite an awkward situation to be in as an activist, right? Because as an activist, you're constantly, after all these very long years of defeat, these decades of defeat and decline of the left, you're constantly somehow trying to water down your own ideas because you're thinking, hey, wait, all right, I think these, but I'm a radical.
We don't have to worry as much about the mainstream media because Corbynism clearly has its own channels of communication. It's a real shame that Kerry-Anne isn't here to talk about the work that the Canary has been done, and we know there's a whole ecology around evolved politics, Navarra and so on, that has emerged in the last couple of years.
I think as Karl Marx ought to have said, but inexplicably didn't, it doesn't matter so much whether the glass is half full or half empty, but whether it is filling up or draining away. And that is the perspective we need to take towards the struggle in the Labour Party, the political struggle. There is the pressure from the state. It was on the front page of the Sunday Times after Corbyn was elected, a general saying, don't worry, if he gets too near, we'll take care of it. And we did ask, is the MOD going to do anything about this? And they said, well, we can't identify which general it was. We spend hundreds of millions on military intelligence and MI5, and they can't figure out who it was. And now we've got this sort of rent-a-quote reactionary, Richard Dearlove, wondering, the former head of MI6, at the time that of the Iraq War, cooking up the intelligence on which that disaster was launched, going around saying Corbyn's going to be a threat to national security. I mean, the threat to national security, if you want that concept, is Richard Dearlove, and he's either utterly incompetent or utterly mendacious, and they aren't mutually exclusive. But these are the challenges we all face. We'll face challenges from the mainstream media, which in this country is very much the same as the fake news media.
Corbyn has changed what is politically possible. Theresa May wouldn't be talking about the rental sector, university tuition fees, promises to students, freezing the levels of debt and so on, if we hadn't done what we did in the last election. And that is thanks to the movement that has gathered around Jeremy.
there's times when kind of quantity turns into quality, because, you know, you think of all these terrible things in schools in America and nothing happens, and you just get them, everybody saying, no, everybody's got to have rifles and everybody's got to carry on. For some reason, I don't know what the reason is specifically, why in this school in Florida they did start thinking differently, and these young kids have really started organising and doing all those things. There's sometimes when it gets to a stage where people are looking around at the world and saying, okay, enough is enough. And I think this is a situation we're getting to in Britain, and I think it's a situation we're getting to in many parts of the world. There's a lot of, perhaps not the main credit, but a lot of the credit must be that at least people are saying, well, this Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party he represents are putting forward something different. They are putting forward public ownership. I mean, it might not be, as Andrew said, it might not be the most dramatic changes compared to some previous Labour governments, but it makes a huge change in terms of what people have seen over the last 30 or 40 years. And I think that's very, very important for us to understand. Talking about how far he can go, I want to make, I suppose, 2 or 3 points about this. Firstly, to talk about what a couple of the barriers that I think are very, very important in terms of this. I guess they're not massively controversial, but I'll just kind of run through them anyway. They may be controversial, but I guess not. Firstly, there's his own side, if you like. There's sections of the Labour Party who, as we know, have campaigned against Corbyn from the very beginning, will do everything to undermine him, who were absolutely amazed and horrified, probably in equal measure, at how well he did in the election last June. I mean, one of my favourite viewing moments of the last year was Stephen Kinnock and a couple of, what's the woman, Ruth Cadbury and somebody else, who obviously agreed to be filmed to bury Jeremy Corbyn, to say, oh yes, he's done really badly, but don't worry, we can get the Labour Party back on its normal track. And actually, of course, they're looking at the exit poll and just thinking, oh my God, this guy isn't going anywhere. He's actually sort of staying there. But we know that although those people were knocked back, I think there's 3 areas where they are determined to keep coming. The most important is the single market around the European Union. They got agreement with him over the customs union, which in my opinion was a mistake, but never mind. But now, straight away, Blair and all these people say, well, he doesn't realise the logic is you've got to be in the single market, and they will keep pushing this. And this is not just about what they want to happen in terms of the EU, it's about what they want to do to defeat the left inside the Labour Party, and I think it's important we understand that. The second thing is the whole question of foreign policy, NATO, the Russian threat, all the things that have been going on recently. And again, they keep coming over this. One of the things I was most encouraged by this week was actually, I think the Saudi Crown Prince visit was a good example of how Jeremy did very well, I thought, from what I heard of him in Parliament, and various MPs obviously spoke, but also some of them came out and spoke, and we had a very good demonstration outside as well. And I think, the more we can kind of kick back against that kind of thing, the more important that it is. The third thing that I think they use is this, in my view, quite disgraceful sort of weaponisation of anti-Semitism, which is a very, very serious problem, in order to attack the left in the Labour Party. And I think this is something that again, and these are only, we can think of many more. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Wilson governments in the 60s and 70s, and right from the time Wilson was elected in 1964, there were right-wing Labour MPs who used his small majority to try to blackmail him, and this is what will happen. This is what they'll try to do if in their position to do it. So I think that is one big problem in terms of how far he can go, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to combat that now before there is an election and before he becomes Prime Minister. The second is, of course, the structures of power, which a number of people, I'm sure, have referred to, and again, we're all aware of them. The power of the right-wing media, big business, the finance system, the state, MI6, the generals that can't be identified that Andrew referred to. All of these are have a vested interest in not having a left-wing government which tries to lead towards a socialistic type of society. That is what they don't want to see. And again, we should remember that with the Attlee government, which was the most successful government, obviously from 1945 to 1951, that you actually had a big organisation by the right wing. You had the consultants in the NHS who actually stopped it from being set up in exactly the way, in the most democratic way that it could have been.